All right, welcome for tuning in, everybody. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst, and we have quite a bit of updates today. Now we're roughly 9 days right before the trade deadline, and we're getting to the point where starting to get a lot more updates, a lot more stuff cycling through pretty quickly. Like yesterday, there was a report in the morning about how the Bulls and Suns talked about a Bradley Beal trade, and then later that night it just ended up getting shut down. No, the Beal wouldn't accept the trade to the Bulls. But today we've got a bunch of stuff adjacent to that with some of the Jimmy Butler stuff. But I want to start on the De'Aaron Fox trade supposedly request or whatever it is. Something I touched on very briefly, but didn't want to get too into it because I just did not feel like it was going to happen before next offseason, but looks like we could finally get some type of resolution. So I'm going to get into that. So I've got this casted on multiple different things right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, to follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky. I will have a lot of good salary cap analysis rapidly as transactions and rumors happen. If you're watching this on Twitter or Blue Sky or wherever, make sure to subscribe on YouTube. I have a lot deeper salary cap analysis about all of this type of stuff I'm going to cover. And also make sure you subscribe to Third Apron, which is my newsletter on Substack. Even more deep analysis, more than this, where I'm going to get into like fake trades, more casual stuff. This gets into more like research heavy, more analytical type salary cap analysis. If you're into that, check it out. Right now I'm doing more about like trade deadline preview though. So one of the most recent things I published over the weekend, I wrote something about the most expensive teams right now and how they could look to save some money and what might end up being the total amount of money like combined after they try to reduce some money. And then also talked about the other side of the spectrum, the teams that could help facilitate those deals, the teams that have a lot of flexibility to increase their payroll and help get some of these big trades flowing, because we hear so much about where all these multiple apron teams doing deals together. You're going to need some team with a lot of more flexibility to make this all work. And that's where a team like the Pistons or the Raptors can come into play. So I get more into that, how they can help out those types of trades. So let's get into this. And I guess the place to start is where the news happened. So we have it. The Kings are expected to open up talks on De'Aaron Fox by Sean Charania ahead of the trade deadline. And so it sounds like I get the feeling that the Kings, they've been active in trades. They've been looking to bring in some help. They've been linked to guys like Cameron Johnson, John Collins, and maybe they got close. Maybe they consulted with him and see if this is something he'd be interested in. And then it could have been the type of thing where he's like, well, you know what, to be honest, I'm still not set on being here long term. So I would imagine whatever talks that they've had to potentially trade a draft pick or young player to bring in someone like this, probably not happening at this point. That's not to say they can't get a guy like Cameron Johnson or John Collins, but maybe it'd be part of a Fox trade instead of them trading a future pick to make that happen, because just given the whole uncertainty about Fox's future just doesn't quite make sense. I mean, not that it doesn't make sense, but I feel like you got to be a little uneasy if you're the Kings about trading a future pick, knowing that Fox might not be there. So now seems like, they're going to finally try to do something. So several teams that have been mentioned, but I do want to just kind of touch on the Kings situation, what they might be looking for. What is it that they're probably going to maybe not so much be limited to? Because I do have some questions about like what they could potentially get, but here's their situation right now. And the biggest thing is they have like almost a full roster, pretty close to the tax, just like most teams. Most teams in the league are either in the tax, or 2/3 of the league are either in the tax or just below it. So they're probably going to be looking for some relief just to help them out now, give them a little more flexibility to do some other moves. Probably want some veterans to help them now, and would probably also want some draft picks. They don't have any surplus. They have all their own picks except for the one that they owe the Hawks that will either convey this year. If it falls within the top 12 or 13, it rolls over again to top 10 protection next year for the Hawks. So yeah, they're going to so now they're in the spot where they're going to have to try to get the best deal possible. Although now, as far as the direction, I would guess that the Kings most likely are going to try to stay good. Whenever a player as good as Fox demands a trade, you would think that, okay, now they're going to pivot to some type of rebuild. And I don't think the Kings are interested in that. I think they're going to try to stay as good as possible. And they'll try to, bring back some assets in form of draft picks and young players, but I think they're also going to want to get players that can help them now. So they've been linked to a couple teams, and I know Shams mentioned on TV that the Lakers are not going to be one of those teams. So I do want to start with mainly, I'm just going to go over on 3 teams. And the first one I want to touch on is the Magic. So the Magic right now, they have a lot of flexibility. They're among one of the teams that I mentioned that can do a lot to help out with the teams needing to save money. They had cap space this summer, and they didn't do all that much with it. They got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and then mostly re-signed players, but they have a lot of flexibility, about $20.4 million below the tax. So they can easily get Fox now just by sending out a couple salaries. So they can do that, stay below the tax, and then still do some more trades to further increase salary later if needed. They still have their room mid-level exception. They can trade for someone making up to that amount. So they have a lot of flexibility. And I did touch on the Magic on Third Apron, just about how they can they could bring in a guy like him, but how that would affect their payroll. Because if they're going to bring in a guy like Fox, they're going to be very expensive once they also have to pay Paolo Banchero on top of Franz Wagner and Jalen Suggs. So here is just like a basic framework of how the Magic could at the very least get it done. And I just try to get the minimum amount of salaries they can send out. I'm going to be putting Kevin Huerter in a lot of these because I imagine that the Kings are going to want to get off him if they're going to be trading Fox now, just to save some more money for next year. But as you can see, so the framework I have, not too much in terms of veterans coming to help. They're getting 2 guards that could potentially help out in Fox's absence. And then the question is the first round draft pick equity. The Magic have 1 extra first round pick in this upcoming 25 first round pick. I just put them sending out 3. I don't know if they need to send out that much for Fox, but just to show they can send out up to 5, including 2 in this draft, optimally. That's the most they can send, a total of 5 right now. So this is just something I could see just to minimally get the Magic working to do this. The thing I put it on Third Apron is that if the Magic do something like this, they're going to be entering the tax pretty early. And that's not to say that they're going to want to be they won't want to be taxpayers, but they're going to probably be in the tax as soon as the season when Paolo's max presumably kicks in. And they can still it won't get too expensive. I projected that they can do something still pay Fox a max and still have something like a $50 million tax payment at most, while still keeping a couple of good guys like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Wendell Carter, have a still pretty deep bench along with their top 4 guys. So they'll have to spend earlier than they probably anticipated. However, I don't see the Magic doing this. Now as news have come out, it's pretty obvious that Fox has one specific destination, which we'll get to later. So he probably wouldn't want to go to the Magic, but just an interesting fit because he is, I think he's someone that the Magic could use. And if it just also not really like a Magic type of thing to do, though, to do this type of splashy trade. So I would say most likely they don't do it, but they do have the means to do something. I think if they do end up doing some sort of consolidation trade, it'd be someone a little cheaper, maybe in like the $20 million range, like a Cameron Johnson or an Anthony Simons type. So that's Orlando. The next pretty talked about team is Houston. So De'Aaron Fox is from Houston, and they could probably use some type of upgrade at point guard. So here's the basic framework. I'm sure it's some people have been putting out something similar out there. The Rockets can trade a lot of extra first round picks, including those extra that they now have from the Suns. If I got the Kings just getting back Fred VanVleet, just a veteran point guard in the place of Fox, and they're able to get off Herter. And I also kind of feel the same way where, and I saw Kelly Uko reported on The Athletic that the Rockets are not interested in doing something like this right now, but the Rockets do seem primed to do some type of consolidation trade in the future. I would guess that they're not really looking to make that upgrade at point guard, even though this does make some sense, mainly because Fred VanVleet's got that big team option for next year, over $40 million. They could decline it, maybe get him back on something smaller, and then still have time to see how Reed Shepherd develops, maybe, and see how much more Amen Thompson could potentially be that point forward that many have believed he'd be. He could be ahead of the draft. So I think you're playing really well right now. No point to mess this up. And I do feel like if they do some type of consolidation trade, I think they'd want someone like Devin Booker. Like, it's the dots got kind of connected towards that when they got all the Suns picks. And I think that makes a little more sense to see if eventually a guy like him will be available. So even without Fox's preference or lack of preference for Houston, I don't think Houston does this either, which then takes us to the Spurs, which is the team that is his preference. I think that was pretty obvious once I think a couple months ago, The Athletic, Sam Amick, who's really plugged in with the Kings, reported how the Spurs are one of the teams that can be, and I think it was him that said the Spurs are like one of the teams that Fox would be very interested in. This was last month, like I think right before, around the time Mike Brown got fired. And now, we're starting to see that things are speeding up to that pretty quickly. And I just want to get to the Spurs cap sheet a little bit because there's just so many different ways that they can do this. So like the Magic, a ton of flexibility. They could do something now. They could increase their payroll, help the Kings out by taking in some unwanted salaries like a Kevin Huerter. But the big question with the Spurs is how are you going to get this done? Because if you're the Kings, I would imagine you're going to want a guy like Devin Vassell or Stephon Castle. And there's just so many different ways this can happen. The Spurs also have a surplus of extra picks, mainly from first-round picks from the Hawks. They have the Hawks 2025 and 2027. I might be missing some others, but I think that's the main surplus the Spurs have to deal with. And as far as salary filler, they've got Keldon Johnson, Zach Collins, both have extra money beyond this season. And Harrison Barnes cannot be traded back to the Kings this year for what it's worth. They already got him from the Kings. You have to wait a year for the Kings to get him back. I would imagine Chris Paul could also, or Trey Jones even, could be on the move just by virtue of them getting yet another guard back. So I've got a couple different frameworks of how I think this could go down. And the first one I want to so I'm going to get into like, what if they move some of their young players first? So here's if they would want to, if they're interested in moving Castle to make it work, maybe they only need to trade 2 first-round picks on top of that, and then Keldon Johnson as the salary filler. So this is one way, and I think it's, as far as what the package ends up being, it'll just be a preference thing, because I'm sure I've spoken to some people, they think, no, I don't think the Spurs would trade Stephon Castle at all, even though they're getting another point guard. And then there's some on the other side, yeah, no, you do not trade Devin Vassell. Here's if they did trade Devin Vassell. It says failed, but this trade would actually work because the Spurs could do Devin Vassell for De'Aaron Fox, and then they could do Chris Paul for Kevin Huerter. Those trades individually work. And if they're sending a guy like Vassell, again, 2 firsts, I don't know if that's too much or too little, but they can, just to show they've got the means to make these frameworks work, and pretty easily, while even taking back some bad money. But so after hearing some feedback from people around the league who are kind of skeptical of how exactly the Spurs would do it, I kind of get the feeling the Spurs, as crazy as it sounds, might not be willing to part with either guy like Vassell or Castle, which then kind of makes it a little weird for the Kings, especially if they're trying to get some players that can help now and potentially be some building blocks for the future. So I came up with something that is more likely, and just about with any of these trades, they're all probably going to have a third or fourth team. So here's this one I've got with 4 teams, and something where the Kings end up getting not only a guard who can fill in for Fox, and Anthony Simons, that type. I was trying to find what kind of guard they can get out there. The one that came to mind I would really like to see the Kings try to get for Fox is if they could pull off some multi-team deal that gets some Jaden Ivey, but I find that kind of unlikely, even if the Spurs send them one of Vassell or Castle. But here I've got the Spurs keeping both Vassell and Castle. So now it's a more picks-heavy package. I've got them sending 4 firsts out to multiple teams. They take back Huerter. If with Chris Paul going out, I imagine with De'Aaron Fox coming in, Chris Paul's probably going to be on the way out. So I have him going to the Lakers, which is something that I'm sure he's going to be linked to if Fox is traded to the Spurs. So for the Kings, they bring in basically all these. The biggest thing is that the Kings, Blazers, Lakers, they all save a bunch of money by doing this trade. The Lakers, not a bunch, but they save just enough to make the trade work by going from Vincent to Paul, going from who did I send out? Christian Wood to Duop Reed because of their second apron restrictions. Kings also get a backup big man. They get a backup point guard to shore up their bench. They get 2 firsts on top of it. So that's just something I could kind of see if this gets expanded, where if the Spurs really don't want to trade either of their cornerstone players they already have, maybe this is kind of how it would end up looking with multiple teams. Blazers get 2 firsts for sending out Simons and Williams and taking back some long-term money. And I already explained the Lakers type situation. So that's more or less kind of how I see some of these frameworks working for De'Aaron Fox. But as far as the Spurs, even though now all the momentum is them getting him, it's also kind of un-Spurs-like to me. One, like I mentioned, I kind of have a hard time seeing them want to part with Devin Vassell or Stephon Castle. I feel like they're going to want to develop those guys even more. And I don't know, it just seems kind of un-Spurs like, just based on their history, to do this type of trade, go all in. And then the other aspect about potentially trading for De'Aaron Fox, and this is what really I think would get me a little iffy if I'm the Spurs, is his contract situation, because he's got 1 more year left on his deal. He's going to be earning $37 million next year, and then he'll be eligible for his max contract extension. If he gets traded, he can no longer get the super max because he can only do that with the Kings. But this would be the 30% max, starts at $51 million, is for 4 years, just under $229 million. And I know these numbers seem pretty high, especially now, but keep in mind with the percentage of the tax and all, it's all relative. But I do have some questions about potentially giving like a no-brainer max contract to De'Aaron Fox, because at best he's maybe like a 20 to 25, top 20 to 25 player in the league. And if you're the Spurs, yeah, you can fit this. You can add this contract. They could even still, they could straight up add him. I'm pretty sure they'll be able to have max cap space in 2026 free agency to sign De'Aaron Fox, because they'll have Zach Collins and some other guys coming off the books. And so there is that threat where they can just sign him outright. But I don't know. I don't think it's a no-brainer to give him a max contract. And that's just those are just another hang up on why I'm a little skeptical on the Spurs stuff. But we'll see. Could be wrong. Maybe the Spurs are ready to just jumpstart the timeline and get to this. They're on the tail end of the play-in tournament range right now. I don't think they'll make it this year. If I'm the Spurs, I would probably revisit it next year. But we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. So that's the Fox stuff. Oh, you know what? No, there's a little something else I want to get touching on. Just as far as the Kings, I just want to get more about their direction, because if they're trading Fox, like I said, I think they're going to try to remain competitive, but I do get the feeling that they might have to consider retooling, doing some sort of mini rebuild in the future, because if they trade Fox, I'm guessing they're still at best going to be in more or less the same range they are now, just fighting for the play-in event, like getting a couple playoff appearances now and then. In which case, at what point do you consider moving on from this era? In which case, I think it'd be wise to start listening to offers on guys like Domantas Sabonis in particular. Your mileage may vary on Sabonis. Definitely a polarizing guy in the league in terms of how great he really is. But I would imagine that his value in the league is pretty high. Like, they can get a pretty big haul from him. I think a lot of teams would like him. So just a thing, because they're not going to have all that much flexibility if they trade Fox. Maybe they'll have some cap space, but not nothing significant. Like, they already have a pretty high payroll heading in the next year. I imagine if they do trade Fox, they're going to end up kind of having more or less an already high payroll, because they're trying to stay good. So just a little thing on their overall direction, because once they trade Fox, on one hand, they might want to consider resetting things a bit more, but also if you don't think Fox is all that great, then maybe you can kind of stay the same level of competitiveness, and maybe even retool the roster in a way we're even better than now. So that's on the Kings. Now, switching gears to Jimmy, because we had quite a few different updates on him. So I touched on the Bradley Beal stuff, where he's not going to sign off on a trade to the Bulls, which over the past few days, people have been trying to come up with 5-6 team trades that gets Jimmy to the Suns, gets Beal to the Bulls, Levine to the Bucks. Now it seems like that's probably not going to happen. And Jimmy Butler just got suspended again. And now it seems like the Heat are just willing to rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak. So this is from Ira Winderman. Earlier this morning, Brian Windhorst said, or maybe it was last night, Brian Windhorst was saying how the Heat are now lowering their price tag. I don't know exactly what that means. We don't know what exactly they were looking for ahead of this. And they are willing to lower the price tag to get off Jimmy now. So here's a confirmation from Ira Winderman saying that the Heat's increasing activity on the trade market, according to a source familiar with the situation, the acceptable return for Butler, despite his 6 All-Star appearances, is now viewed as an expiring contract, potential contributing component whose contract. So getting an expiring contract or someone who doesn't run beyond the next season, and some draft picks. So that sounds pretty cheap, all things considered. I don't know what pair of draft picks exactly means. If it's like multiple first round picks, I would guess maybe like one first round pick and some seconds. And then this is from Kevin O'Connor, basically following up on the whole, that whole aspect of the Heat's lowering their price tag, that the Warriors are in the mix for Jimmy again. So that's interesting to me because when I talked about Jimmy trades last month, I did touch on the Warriors because the early teams that he was linked to were the Warriors, Rockets, Mavs, and then the Suns. And then the Warriors made their Dennis Schroeder trade. And when that happened, then there was some people are wondering, can they still get Jimmy Butler while keeping Schroeder? So a lot has changed since then, but here's what the Warriors payroll is right now. And the biggest thing to note is that they are right at the $178 million first apron. They cannot exceed their hard cap to it. And they're, for the most part, going to have to make the trade as close to dollar for dollar as possible or decrease payroll, which the Heat are also over the first apron. They're deep into the tax. There's another framework that if he goes to the Warriors, they're going to need multiple teams to make it happen. So when I touched on the what the Warriors could still do to get Jimmy while keeping Dennis Schroeder. So this is when like they just got Schroeder and the expectations are going to want to keep him. And also an expectation was that if they're going to trade for Jimmy Butler, they're probably also going to have to trade Jonathan Kuminga along with multiple picks. Maybe I was off on that. But this was the framework where let's say they traded Andrew Wiggins, Gary Payton, Jonathan Kuminga. Then they bring back Jimmy Butler. They finished just under the first apron, so they could still backfill the roster with prorated minimum salaries. So that's kind of the what I kind of thought the Heat would want from the Warriors. Now a lot has changed. The Warriors are struggling. The Schroeder trade has not quite worked out like they hoped. He's actually playing like a lot worse than when he was with the Nets. And Kuminga's injured, but just now, given how much lower Butler's trade value is, I would guess if just based on that report of what the Heat are looking for, that the Warriors probably don't even need to trade Kuminga to make this happen. So, and then on top of that, so the Warriors can make a deal happen now, obviously, with the Schroeder situation. I mean, not situation, with how he's developed. I think he's expendable again. They could re-aggregate him the day before the trade deadline if they need to make the extra salaries work. But basically, they got to trade like like 2 or 3 mid-size salaries along with either Wiggins or Draymond Green. And I suppose most likely it would be Wiggins who goes. So then the other thing, though, that has changed recently, or not changed, just being reported, is about Vucevic, Nikola Vucevic, how the Warriors are interested in him and how they just seem to be the only team linked with him. The Lakers were linked to him, but that doesn't seem to be, I don't think that's going to, so now there's some reports that they don't want him. So the question that came to me is, can the Warriors pull off getting Jimmy Butler and Vucevic? And the short answer to that is yes. So here's this wild one I came up with. It says failed, but I'll get to why. It mostly has to do with the Raptors, but this trade works. And as far as what the Warriors' end would be, they would be sending out 6 players to bring back Jimmy Butler, Vucevic, and Torrey Craig. They keep Jonathan Kuminga, and this is kind of the pseudo all-in trade I could see the Warriors trying to do to try to revive the season, where neither Butler or Vucevic are under contract for too long that you could pivot out of it pretty quickly if needed. And they're also not giving up really that much long-term assets in terms of first-round picks. I only have them trading 1, but I'll explain. So with the Bulls, I don't see them getting a first round pick for Vucevic as good as he's been this year. When I look at the market, who needs another starting center, especially for a guy like Vucevic who might not close for a lot of contenders. I don't see that out there. So I could see a 2-team type of trade where the Warriors end up getting Vucevic for Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, who have these long deals that are not guaranteed on the ends of it, so they could easily be moved again. So the Bulls are basically getting a ton of second-round picks because I got the Warriors sending one, and then you can probably flip Buddy Hield and Kyle Anderson also for some second-round picks. So I think that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I feel like this is kind of what they're looking for at best for Vucevic, just like a bunch of second-round picks. So then with the Heat stuff, I've seen a lot of frameworks that would send Wiggins there, and I think that makes sense. The big thing, though, is that Wiggins got 2 more years on his contract beyond this season, and the Heat's plan is supposedly to have max cap space for 2026, just in case a guy like Luka becomes available. Now, I wouldn't bet on them, getting anyone big in 2026 for agency, just with the nature of how much players are extending and avoiding free agency. Chances are there's not going to be anyone quite that good available in 2026 free agency. But they want to keep that option open. So what if instead they get some expiring contracts of guys that could help them, and they get 1 first-round pick, which kind of is in line with that price tag that Winderman put. So the Raptors, they are reportedly want to get involved with a Jimmy Butler trade, be a third team, and I've got them getting Wiggins and some expiring salaries. They send out Brown and Boucher. They have about $10 million below the luxury tax, so they could do this while increasing their payroll, still barely duck the tax. So that they would basically do Brown and Boucher for Wiggins and one of Payton and Looney, and then they could use their mid-level exception to take the other guy. That's why it says failed, but that's what they could do. So for the Raptors, I think about the possibility if they'd be interested in a guy like Wiggins, because there was a report by Mark Stein today about how it was an update on Brandon Ingram, and he mentioned that the Raptors could be interested in Ingram. So in that case, maybe they could also be interested in Wiggins, who, he's from Canada, just another athletic wing they could bring in. Although I do think with the Raptors, you kind of fall into some of the problems that they had last year, where you had so many talented wings, but aside from OG Anunoby, they weren't really good shooters. So now you're trying to replicate that with Barnes, Barrett, and Wiggins. I understand the concept, but I do struggle to see how that can really be like a recipe for success. And then the Pistons, I could see them using another guard, and if they can get Schroeder for free, or maybe even get like a second-round pick for taking on Schroeder, it's intriguing. 1, okay, they get a guard, but 2, they can flip him immediately since they have cap space. They have $14 million in cap space. They could take in a guy making up to that amount, and as long as they finish below the cap, they could aggregate him immediately. So let's say they wanted to trade him with like Tim Hardaway, make $16 million, then you could bring in like a 30-something, almost $40 million player. Not that they're gonna do that, but just a very interesting, I always try to include Pistons in trades. Just a very intriguing thing where they can just facilitate a big trade like this, and then whoever they bring in used to help facilitate yet another trade. So just kind of wanted to put my feel on how the Jimmy situation is now, and specifically how, if based on this price tag reduction and now some momentum to the Warriors, how that could shake out. So then the last thing I just want to touch on is with Jimmy Butler. Once the Suns made that trade with the Jazz, it seemed like they were going to, it seemed like a lot of momentum that Jimmy might be heading to the Suns. And now, so that was like, I think a week ago exactly. And now it hasn't happened. Seems like that's not happening, especially with all the reports about Bradley Beal's no trade clause being a factor, which basically means that they're probably going to be pivoting more so to Nurkic trades. Now with those extra 3 first-round picks they have, they are probably going to do more marginal trades to bring in some rotation players and try to save money, because they have I've been touching on this in like quite a bit on the Suns, but they have a really expensive roster at the moment. They have about 380 million in between their payroll and tax. It was just over 400 million before the Nick Richards trade. So they saved a bit of money there, and they can't get anyone really making over Nurkic's salary. So whatever they do, in all likelihood, they'll be keeping their 3 top guys and then trying to move some combination of Nurkic or Allen maybe as well to get some players that can help them better, but then also save some money. And I want to there was this one. So Bobby Marks on ESPN. I want to show just this one trade he came up with because it really got me interested about the type of thing that they could do. So here he has them trading Jusuf Nurkic. This was in his trade deadline tiers for all 30 teams, his trade deadline guide. And so check it out if you haven't seen it already. And he does a trade for each team. It's really good. But he has the Suns trading a first-round pick with Nurkic to the Clippers to bring in PJ Tucker, Bones Highland. So they just bring in expiring contracts, saves them a ton of money. So that got me thinking, I still think they could use some help at center. Because it's basically just Nick Richards right now, and then a little bit of Oso, a little bit of Mason. And so I think these are a lot smaller scale moves I'm going to show, but here's just something I could see it happening where they're with the Wizards. Maybe if now that the Wizards, they could use an extra first round pick in this draft, maybe they get what would be the 30th in this draft to take on Nurkic, who in exchange for Jonas Valanciunas has 2 years left on his deal, but only 1 is guaranteed. So eventually still, they're not really taking on extra money by doing this trade. And if they do this, the biggest thing is they lose about like 9 million in cap space, which the Wizards are going to have like 30 million. But why not use that flexibility now if you can get some first round draft equity? So, they so the Suns bring in Jonas, not a guy who's going to really thread the needle for them, but saves them a lot of money. And then in that same regard, maybe something with the Raptors where they bring in Boucher, maybe get the Raptors to take on another minimum salary player who's not in the rotation like Bol to save them even more money. The Raptors could do this while still staying below the tax. It says failed because of Stepien rules, which doesn't make sense. But bringing a guy like Boucher to come off the bench, help them he's having a really good year. Something I could see happening, just something like that. Nothing exciting, just to show how it just seems like last week we went on the highs of, the Suns might get Jimmy Butler, to now it seems like they're probably more realistically going to get a guy like a new backup big man that saves them a ton of money. And this is kind of more or less what it would do. That saves them a 60 million between their payroll and tax. So between a trade like this and the Nick Richards trade, the Suns would save about like 80 million against the tax. So there we go. That's a lot of updates on all these different players and teams, and I just wanted to touch on all of them. If we get a lot more stuff reported over the next day or two, maybe I could try to do a couple of these more often. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. Link, you can see on the overlays where to follow me. Make sure to subscribe to me on YouTube, and make sure to subscribe to Third Apron. There's going to be a lot of good content there, a lot of good analysis as we get closer to the trade deadline.